All right, welcome to my course on SQL injection. I just want to give you a heads up that this is a short section from my complete ethical hacking course. I decided to pull this section out because there are quite a few people that were really interested in just a particular section. So I'm going to try and pull those out, add to them, and expound on them so that I can give you guys more content in shorter sections. So that way it's not all just bunched up into one really long video, even though this video in and of itself is pretty long. I also noticed that while I was going back through and editing this video and adding to it, that when I originally had shot this video, it was about 3 to 4 a.m. And so I just wanted to let you know that I sound pretty good in ×2 speed as you're going through this course. So I hope you enjoy it, and if there's anything you guys would like to see in the future, please let me know down in the description and I can try and get to that. So for the next few minutes, I'm going to show you a little bit of a walkthrough and explain SQL injection from the Natas website. And I don't want you to actually go there or try and do this walkthrough. We're going to have plenty of practice when I have you create an account with Portswigger and we walk through the Portswigger SQL injection lab. And then I'm going to show you what the code actually looks like in a SQL database. And I actually wrote a React app that's hooked up to a Node.js backend with MySQL as the database. So you can kind of see what the code looks like. Not that you need to memorize it, but it might help a little bit. Then we are going to move from there into Portswigger and try to walk through the SQL injections together. So for the next few minutes, as I am on the Natas website, just try and follow along and maybe catch a few nuggets of detail to understand. And then as I walk you through the actual back end of a SQL database, I hope that you can understand it and maybe even do a few of the Portswigger walkthroughs with me and then come back and watch my SQL database explanation again, and hopefully it will begin to click. This is one of those attacks that is really common, and so it's something that you should know. And up front, I'm just going to tell you, it might take you watching this and going through these labs several times to fully grasp the SQL injection, but that's okay. It takes time to become an ethical hacker. So with that, let's jump into it. Okay, we are going to begin working through some SQL injection. This is something that you can find. There are bug bounty hunters that dedicate their time only to looking for SQL injection. So if this is something that you find interesting, you can become really proficient at it, and this can be something that you primarily search for. So this is something I suggest learning, and learning well. It's easy to look for. You don't really need to know a whole lot about SQL databases in order to find these, but it does help. In the bug bounty world, it's actually a lot easier than if you find these on a capture the flag, because all you have to do is put in a time delay to have a proof of concept. But in a capture the flag, you'll have to know a little more than what we're going to go over here. But for the sake of not going through and learning how to program in SQL databases, I think it would take just too much time. And so we're going to go through how to find these if you were to start looking on bug bounty programs. And I went ahead and opened up Natas 15. You don't have to go through this or work through this. I'm only going through this to show you what it's going to look like, and then we're going to actually go over to Portswigger and we're going to work through their practice SQL injections. And so just to give you an idea of what we're doing, when you come to a login form such as this one of the best things you should do and you should regularly check for is just to put in a single quote, and then you would hit enter and see what happens. And it says this user does not exist. What we're looking for is an error in the query. So I would go and I would do a double quote next, and I would hit check existence. And if you can hit an error, this is what we're looking for. And I'll actually show you in Burp, because this is where you're probably going to be sending your request through. So you'll hit check existence. You would send this to your repeater. And I'm actually just going to go ahead and change this so you can see it. And then you would hit send. And it says we get an error in query. What we're going to see here in a little bit is we're going to see this be a 501, an internal service network error. And that's usually what you'll see. Start finding these, but you will find what is called a blind SQL injection. We're going to look at those a little bit later. So we still have the error. So what do we do with the error is we're going to start the enumeration process, but we're actually not going to do that here. I just wanted to show you kind of what we're looking for here so that you can look for it on your own in the first Portswigger lab and see what you can find if you can find it on your own. But just to give you a little more of an idea of what's going on in the background, the SQL database and the SQL language is going to look something like this. Select all from users. This will be where username equals, and this is what we input right here. So this would be our input. So what we did is we took this. This is what it'll look like. And this is what we can put in here. So you'd put your single quote or your double quote. And in the case of the natas web application, what it has is something like this. And then here's where you're putting your query, where you're putting in to see if the username exists. And so when we put in another double quote, what happens is you break the query and this produces the error right here, because it doesn't need to be there, it shouldn't be there in order for this to work in programming. And so that's how you break it. Okay, what we're about to go over is going to be a little advanced, but I think it will help you visualize what's going on beyond more than what I just showed you in the last video. So what I have up is actually MySQL Workbench. We have here just a simple database username I was testing. Here's an actual username and password. This is what a table will look like. And so in our query, we have select all from users, which is our schema, and then the table, which is users, that's not capitalized letter here. And so this is what a table looks like, and what's going to happen is this is running on a server, and when we send a query to the back end of a web application, it will reach out to the server and see if our query is true. So I want to pause here because this is an update. I want to pause here and explain something a little better that I noticed I didn't do a very good job of. When you make a query to a database, the whole reason I wanted to show you the workbench is so that you could see these are the tables. So if I came over here and I said select all from blog post, then we're going to be grabbing the tables from inside the blog post. And so when we look at this, select all from users, this is showing all the databases. So this is a database, this is a database, and we're selecting from this database right here, the users table. So the first one that we see right here, this is the database, and this is the table within the database. So select all from database and then table. This will be really helpful in the future when we learn to run SQL map and we need to know the context of SQL map. And so this is what it will look like, the code will look like. We have our database and we're querying our database, and we are selecting all from the users table where the username equals, and then you can just pretend this is blank because this is where our input is going to go in here. So we're selecting all users from the table where our input is at, and the password is equal to the other input. And so this makes sure that we have an actual username, and then it makes sure we have a password that matches our username and our password from our table. And so what this looks like is over here we have our login here, and if we type something in and we type in a password and we hit login, it's going to say wrong username / password. And so if we come in here and we actually have our actual login made, it'll say we are logged in. And so when we do a SQL injection, basically what we're doing is sending in a request that we decide what it's going to be to the database, to the back end of the website that reaches out to our database server. So this is a pretty simple SQL injection that we're going to be covering here, and we're going to be going into union select statements after this video, which I think are more common than what we're about to go over. And so it's very important to learn the union select SQL injection statements. There are some bug bounty hunters that dedicate all of their time only to SQL injection. So I just made this, I'm shooting this video because I really want you to understand what's going on, and it'll make more sense. Don't worry if it doesn't make sense right now. You may have to come back to this video more than once and go over the union select statements labs on your own, and then come back to them after a day or two and just continue practicing them until you really have them down. And so one of the things that we're looking for when we do a SQL injection is, I'm going to inspect this so you can actually see this happen. We're going to have our console up, ignore my errors because my code is not perfect. When you put in a single quote, it will break this right here, and it will crash our server. So if we go ahead and throw that in, you see our connection is refused, and if you come over here, you can see our application has crashed, which means I need to restart it. And now our application's running. And so when you send that, you'll have an internal server error, which is what we essentially just got right here. And so how we get past this is by actually giving it a statement that is true, so that it will give us back the first login in the database. It'll give us back the first username and password. And so we're going to make a true statement right now. And so what we'll do is we'll just throw in, it doesn't really matter, and then our single quote, and then we'll have or 1 equals 1, and then we comment out everything after that, and then our password doesn't matter either, and it says we're logged in. But if we just have this right here, it'll tell us that we're not logged in because this isn't correct. So if we have this in here, what we're saying is this username right? Is this a true username? And the answer is no. You see we have wrong username and password. But 1 equals 1 is always true. And then we comment everything out after this statement with this hash, so our password doesn't work. So you see how this is all in one line of code. This is all getting ran together. It's making this query all together, and what we're doing is essentially commenting out everything after our username, so the password doesn't even matter. So when I say we comment something out, we're commenting out everything after our statement. And so we throw this hash in here, and everything after it's commented out, the password doesn't matter. I think we can get by with no password because I don't have it set up right now that you have to have any characters in here, and it will come back as true. And this is what I'm talking about when we say SQL statement and we're querying a database or a server. Okay, there is one other thing I really want to show us. We're going to go over this again, exactly what I'm showing you right now, in another couple of videos, but I think it'll be helpful to see it. So one other thing is, whenever you give it a database a true statement, it's going to come back without an error or saying it's a logged in. It's going to come back as true. So we just saw the statement that looked like this. We had our username, and then we had or 1 equals 1, and 1 equals 1 is always true, and so it comes back as logged in or it comes back as true. There are other things we can do to get information from a database. See, we want these username and passwords, and we have an ID. So we have 3 columns here that have information in them. Let's say we know the table is users, and we want to know how many columns we have. What we'll do is to pull down something true. If we want to pull down the number of columns because we don't actually know how many there are, and we want to just find out some information from this database, you can actually come in here just like we did before, put in our random username that doesn't really matter, and then this is what I mean when I say a union select statement. So we're going to connect union to our statement here. So we have select all from users where username equals these things, and then we're going to add to it. We want to add a union select, if I can spell, we're going to select null, and this will tell us, is there one column in our table? And we send this, we're going to crash the server. I'll go ahead and send it so you can see we crash the server. I have to come over here, restart the server, and then I'm just going to give you, there's 3 columns. We know there are 3 columns, so we'll throw in null 2 more times, and this will say union select null null null, which is going to pull down how many columns there are. And if we send this, we got crashed the server because we didn't comment out the rest of the string that we were querying. So here we go. We'll log in. Now we have no undefined came back, which means we have no errors. So we'd know there are 3 columns. And so this is going to come up in one of our very first SQL injections that we're going to be doing on the Portswigger web application. And there are labs that they have set up for us to practice on, and you feel free to continue practicing in there, but this is something we're going to be doing, and we're going to be going in a lot more detail, and you'll have to pay attention to this comment because it will change between 2 dashes without the semicolon based on the type of database that we're using. So I do apologize if this seems confusing. Hopefully it becomes more clear. It's in the top 10 most common vulnerabilities. I think it's in the top 5 most common vulnerabilities. Looking a little difficult right now because you've never seen it before. But by the end of this module in the course, if it's still unclear, you can go back and try it again and go back through this module, and it will become more clear, and you will memorize how to find these vulnerabilities. So with that, I will see you in the next video. Okay, we are here on portswigger.net. You can go ahead, I actually went ahead and logged in and created a new account. You can come in here and you can come up here, click sign in, and then create a new account. And then once you've done that, come back to the website and you will go to Academy. You can go ahead and click that and it'll load up, and then you'll go to all labs. This will take us to some of the labs we're going to be working through and the SQL injection. If you are having a hard time finding this exact URL right here, I will put a link to it in the description, or you can just type this out in order to get to all the labs. There's a whole bunch of them. We're not going to be going through all of them because some of them get kind of repetitive, and it has been a while since I have done these, at least a year. And so I actually thought what would be good, I'm not going to rehash any of these before we go through them. So you are going to see me make mistakes, and you'll get to see my thought process, and you'll kind of just get to see how I work through these. And so if you want, you can go ahead and open up the first one. And then I like to open it up in a second tab over here, and they'll give you some instructions and kind of tell you what you're looking for here. They'll actually tell you where to find some of the SQL injections so you don't have to spend your time clicking through the whole web application and trying to figure out where things are. And so they kind of point you in the right direction. And so we're looking for a SQL injection with the union attack. And so what this looks like, let's open this back up. So this is what their side of the query looks like. And then we would be typing in, you would close it off. In our case, it's going to be a single quote, union select, and then we're going to be looking for the number of columns and what we can find within this vulnerability. So we come over here and it says find the number of columns returned by the query. And there's a couple of ways to do this. I think I'll show you both. I think they both work in this program, and you can decide what works best for you. So you can come in here, and I actually want to first give you a chance. I'll show you kind of what we're looking for and see if you can find it on your own. So you can come in here, send one of these to your repeater, and see if you can find the SQL injection without any help. And it's okay if you haven't. We really haven't covered this a whole lot, but in the coming videos, we'll be able to do this multiple times over and over. And so you'll get the hang of what we're going through and what we're looking for. Okay, I'm going to send this to the repeater. I'm not actually sure where the SQL injection is even at. I think we'll try right here. Okay, that's what we're looking for. It is going to be right here. And so we're looking for this right here. This is what I was talking about in the last video, the internal server error. If you can produce this error, what you should immediately be thinking is there's going to be a SQL injection here somewhere. It is here somewhere. You just have to figure out how to exploit it. Challenge actually tells us to do is we're looking for the number of columns returned. And so we're trying to figure out how many columns are on the specific table. And so if you think of an Excel spreadsheet, you have rows and then you have columns. And what we're trying to do is figure out how many columns exist on the table. And when you're doing a SQL injection, we're going to be looking for passwords as we go through the Portswigger program, but there are a lot of other things you can look for, and we're going to get to those and exactly how to find them. Even though you're never really going to pull down actual information on a bug bounty program, I wanted to walk through, as someone who doesn't know how to program in SQL, what to do if you come across a capture the flag and you're trying to find specific things such as usernames or flags or passwords. And so we'll get to that in the coming videos, but now we have produced this internal server error, and so we know we are looking for the number of columns using the union attack. So we have our single quote which breaks the query, and then we type in union, and because we are sending this request, we have to send a plus for the space. If you don't have the plus in there, and you actually put a space in, it will break what we're trying to send. So union, select, and then you put in here null, which is just nothing, and then you send it, and it comes back with nothing, and then you just hit comma, and then you put in null, and you'd send it, and it still sends us an error. So we put in null again, and we send it. And oh, you know what we forgot to do was you have to close out the rest of the query. So in here we have to put a dash dash, so that comments out everything after our statement here. So, and then we'd come over here and we'd put in null again, and it still says we haven't found the number of columns. And so it hit on the number 3, it came back, okay, so this statement would be true. So when the statement is true, it'll send us back a response. And so we have our response, which means there are 1, 2, 3 columns inside this lab we're working on. And so as we come into the next one, we'll read the instructions and we'll work through it. What I would like for you to do is go ahead and open up the second lab and click access to the lab. And I want you to go in here and do exactly what we did last time and see if you can remember how to find the number of columns in a SQL table. So you can go ahead, you can open that up, see if you can find it, and then if you want to try and figure out how to find the columns containing text, you can Google around and see if you can figure it out. If not, we're going to work through it now, and you will have the opportunity to practice finding columns containing text, as well as continuing to find the number of columns in a table in the future. So this isn't your only chance to try and practice this on your own. Okay, if you were able to pull down the number of columns, then you have figured out or learned what we went through in the last lesson. But if not, we're going to go ahead and work through this one again. So we'll come in here, click on one of these tabs, and we'll have a request sent, a get request, and then we will take it and send it to repeater, see if we can find an internal server error. Might not actually be in this one. Let's see. There it is. It's in this one. So we'll send this to repeater and put in our single quote. There is the error. So this is where our injection is going to be. And so if you weren't able to find it, you can go ahead and from here and see if you can solve the challenge and pull down the number of columns in this lab. So you can go ahead and give that a try now. What we do here, if you remember, is we type in union and our plus, then we select, and then we have our plus, and then we type in our first null value for the column, and then we comment everything else out after the request is sent. And it says we still have an error, and so we try this in. You actually don't have to have these in all caps. It's just kind of common practice for what people usually do, is have things in all caps. I'm not really even sure why, so if you know why, you can go ahead and let me know. So we pulled this down, we found 1, 2, 3 columns. And so if you made it this far, good job, congratulations. You have learned how to pull down the number of columns, but now we're supposed to pull down which column has text or which ones take text. And so you would put in your single quotes, and then you put in a string and then send it. And that one came back as an error, so we'll try the next column. And it is the second column contains text, and we'll go ahead and try the final column as well. Whoops. Okay, so it would be the center column is the one we would go after to try and pull down information, which is not actually available in this lab, but it is going to be available in the coming labs. So in the next lab, I want you to try and go through this, find the category of where you're going to find your error, and then try and pull down union, select the number of columns, which column contains text, and then we'll work through how to actually pull down the information from that column. All right, I did not notice after I had closed the video that the lab still said it was unsolved. And for those of you that is bothered when a lab goes unsolved or you want to see them all solved, I'm going to go ahead and do that now. So we'll go ahead and I'll show you where to find that. If you want, you can go ahead and try and find it. I actually think this is a good challenge. I think you'll be able to find it. Just go ahead and go into perform the SQL injection, find the one that contains a string, and then look through the response and read through it and see if you can find the answer to solve the challenge. This here solves the challenge for you. So now the challenge is solved, and I will see you in the next lesson. Okay, we are back with the third SQL injection challenge. You can go ahead and click on it and read through the prompt. I'm actually going to give you the challenge to see if you can pull down which column or columns contain characters and will accept a string. And then I'm going to walk you through pulling down data from the table. And then I would suggest practicing, so after we go through it on this lab, to try and go through it again without the video before you move on to the next lesson, so that you can continue practicing things as you see it happening. So we'll go ahead and enter into the lab, and it's going to be pretty much the same. So if you want to go ahead now, I'm going to wait a few seconds and you can pause the video and see if you can complete the challenge and pull down which column or columns contain a string before we go ahead and continue learning how to enumerate the table columns. So by now this should be pretty familiar to you. We're going to come in here, we're going to look for our request that I apparently passed. We'll send this to repeater. We'll make sure that we get our internal server error, and then we'll try our union select attack and send it and see how many columns we pull down. So there's only 2 in this lab. And so what we'll do now is we're going to pull down information from the table. So I'm going to show you how to do that. Then I'm going to give an explanation of the best way, if you don't know any SQL or you don't know how to write any SQL statements, how to find table names if you find this in a capture the flag and you don't want to go through the long process of trying to figure out the table names through writing SQL statements. But before we get there, I'm going to show you, this is what we'll do. We have two columns. You'll see, check to see if they'll accept a string, and that one does. I'm going to go ahead and leave it, and that one does as well. That means both these columns have information within them. And let's say there was a third column. If we were to write our SQL statement, we would have to include all three columns because the query has to be considered true. You would just leave the null statement in here. And we're going to see some of these in the coming videos. And just to give you an idea that you can go ahead and try and do these, you would do null plus the username. See, this is what you have to do. You'd leave this as an empty column. But in our case, we don't have three columns, so we're going to just go with the ones that we do have and the ones that will accept a string. And so we're going to pull down usernames, and then we're also going to look for the passwords in the table. So we would look for the password, and this should pull down for us the username and the password from the users table. And see, this looks like a user, this looks like a password, this looks like a user, this looks like a password, and this would be the administrator, this would be his password. So in our response, we have pulled down the usernames and the passwords that are within the table, and this would give us access. If we wanted to, you could log in as these people. If this was a real website, you would have access to their accounts. You can go ahead and turn your proxy off so that the web page loads, and then you will have the usernames here and the passwords, and you can come over to log in and you can give them a try and see if you're able to log in and see if this solves the challenge. There, that one solved the challenge for us. So with that, I want you to go ahead and see if you can figure out the next challenge without any help. See how far you can get and if you can make it through. We're going to skip over this fourth lesson and we're going to jump into the fifth lesson. And you can go ahead and open this up and read through it. This time we're going to be in an Oracle database, and so we're going to be trying to pull down the version that it is running. And so with this tip, we can see there's a built-in table called dual. So they actually give us the table name this time for us to run through. And I think with what you've learned so far in the SQL injection cheat sheet, you should be able to figure out how to solve this challenge. So if you want to go ahead and pause the video now and try, you can go ahead and do that. If not, we're going to walk through the solution together. So we'll open up the page. We'll go ahead and turn our proxy on. And this should all be familiar to you by now. So we're sending that to repeater. We make sure that we get our internal server error, and then we move on just like we have before. So we type in union, select, and then we'll check for a single column. But if you remember, the table name we were told is called dual. And so we can send that, and we still have an error, so let's try for a second column, and we see that there are two tables or two columns and the table name of dual. So we'll come in here and make sure they can receive a string, and they can. So what we'll do now is we're looking for, if you remember, the version name. We're trying to pull down the version name inside the response. So we'll come back to burp, and since these can receive string, we type in here banner, and then if you remember from the previous lesson, if we have multiple columns that can receive a string and we're not actually going to use one, we have to leave it with null, so that way that column receives an input. We just don't want anything from it yet at this point. And then for Oracle, the way you pull down a version is $, and then just the word version. This is the Portswigger SQL injection cheat sheet. And so you can see how they have different databases and the different payloads or statements you would use in order to get back the information you need. I'm going to have this linked in the description, and so you should be able to use this throughout the SQL injection labs and solve some of these on your own with these statements. There are also really good SQL injection cheat sheets on GitHub. You can just Google SQL injection cheat sheet and pick one that you like and use it. There are a ton of different payloads that do a bunch of different things, and GitHub is a really helpful place, but because these are Portswigger Labs, their cheat sheet might be the best for you, so you can give this a look over. This is really helpful in solving these labs, and I think the payload I'm using in this case can be found on this cheat sheet. And we'll see if that sends it for us. I saw this change in the background to solved, so that gets us our information that we need. And so we should be able to scroll through here and we find it right in here. Okay, in this lesson we're going to go ahead and open up this one, the MySQL and Microsoft. I will just go ahead and tell you they are trying to pull a quick one on us, because instead of using the typical dash right here that we use in Microsoft to close out or to cancel or to comment out everything after your query, you will use a hashtag, and that will stump me. I will come across that and I can sometimes not figure out what's going on, and I can spend a significant amount of time trying to figure it out, and in the end I was using the wrong comment. And so that's one thing to be aware of. And in this lab, we're going to inject an attack. We're going to pull down the type and version of MySQL that's being used. And so this is very, very similar to the last one. And when you go ahead and open up the lab, we are looking to make the database retrieve the string. So I'm actually not entirely sure how to get this to say solved. So we're gonna be figuring this out together for, I guess, the first time. So I'm guessing what we're supposed to do is use our union select attack, pull down the response that we get right here, and try and find the version, which will look something like this, that it's using, and then go back and put it into a string, and it should give us the problem solved up here. So if you would like to go ahead and give this a try on your own, you can go ahead and do that, and I'll give you a few seconds and you can pause the video and then we'll walk through it together. We're going to continue the same way we have been. Turn on the proxy, pick a category, send it to repeater, turn the proxy off. I'm going to lower this so when it comes through as solved we can see it. We'll see if we get our error, and we do. Try it for null, and then don't forget the way we comment out is with the hash or the pound symbol. It has more than one column, and it has two columns. So what we will do is we will make sure they can both receive a string, and they do. And so the way we pull down the version in Microsoft MySQL is a little different than the way we did it with the Oracle one. We'll go with the 2 @ symbols, you type in version, and if you looked through the cheat sheet, you would know this is how you pull down the version for Microsoft. And so what we do is we type in null because you have to have both columns filled, and then we'll send it. And we came back with a positive response, and so we'll look and see if we can, oh, it solved it for us. It already said solved. I thought we were going to have to find a version number and send it through as a string right here. Okay, at this point, things are going to become progressively more difficult in pulling down usernames and passwords, especially once we get to the blind SQL injection, because this is something that we have not seen before. So we're going to be preparing for that by going into this lab right here. You can go ahead and open it up, and we are going to be pulling down the username and passwords, and we're going to log in as the administrator to solve this challenge. I think you can go ahead if you want and practice pulling down how many columns there are and which ones actually receive a string, and you can go ahead and pause and do that if you would like. If not, we're going to go ahead and solve it together. So we'll turn on the interceptor, and we're going to be seeing some new information that we haven't seen before. It's going to seem strange, but I'm going to do my best to explain exactly how the SQL statements work, the default tables, and what we're looking for. So we'll go ahead, send that to repeater, turn that off, send that, make sure we get our error, determine how many columns there are. String, and they do. So at this point, things are going to be a little bit different than what we've been doing. We're actually going to be trying to pull down some information from these tables. And so what we do, the first thing we have to do is figure out the table name. So if we have a grid like an Excel sheet, you have your columns that are going up and down, your rows that are going across, and the name of the table. The first thing we have to know is the table name in order to request the columns and then individual cells within the table for us to pull down that contain the usernames and the passwords. So we have our union select, and then we come in and we type in table name. And so this is what we're looking for. If you remember, we're replacing one of the null values with the table name. Then we leave the second one with the null value because we're not going to be pulling anything from it just yet. And then we go from the information schema. And this right here, the information schema dot tables, and this is a default table that you're going to have on every SQL database. So that's how I know this is there. If you were to go into SQL and you were to open it up, you're going to have several default tables, the information schema tables. This is default, it's always going to be there. And so this is how we know what to put in for our injection. Then we send it, and we have an error, which means I'm guessing I have a typo schema. There was my typo. And we pull down and we'll look through our response and pull down the table names that we have here, and there are a bunch of table names. But if you remember, the one we're looking for, we're trying to log in as the administrator, so we're going to need the users table right here. Users, this is the name of users table. I would suggest copying it and having a text file open because we're going to need this information. So now we're going to look for the column name, so we can delete this. So the table column is what we're looking for now. So we're going to, actually, I deleted the wrong part of the request. Instead of the table, we're looking for the column name. and we're going to leave this in the information schema dot columns, and this looks right. And now we're going to add to this, because now we're looking for the columns from a very specific table. So now we add a plus, and we'll say where the table name equals, and then our users table that we just pulled down. So we'll type in table name, and then we do equals, and then our double quotes. I think I've actually already got that copied still. And then we paste in our users table. So what we have going on is our union select. So everything that's coming before this doesn't really matter. We're adding a query onto it. We're looking for the column name. We have our second value retrieving null because we're not looking for anything from it just yet, from the information schema, which is one of the defaults within the SQL database. And we found the table, so now we're looking for columns where the table name, so we're pulling down the table name, equals users. This is going to give us the columns within the table that is named users with some random characters. And so we should be able to send this. So now we should be able to scroll down, and we have column names. So the passwords column and the users column. And so now we should be able to change our query and pull down the passwords and the username. So I'm going to go ahead and copy these. We have the username and the password columns. These are the ones that we are interested in. And now we're going to change our union statement. So now instead of pulling down a column name, we are going to be looking for the username and the password. So we can delete our null and we can insert the password column, and here we'll put in the username column in the first slot instead of the column name, and we're looking for the username, the password. From users. Let's see if that works for us, and it does. So we should be able to come through now to solve the challenge. We have the administrator and another user, so we can copy the administrator. We can come back to our lab. Remember, to solve it, we have to log in as the administrator. We can paste in the administrator, and then we can come back to burp and copy our password, and this should solve the challenge for us. Okay, now that was very, I don't want to say complicated, but it was a big jump from where we have been coming and where we've been coming from. And so as we get ready to go into blind SQL injections, it's going to become even more complicated. So you might have to go through this lab several times and make sure that you really understand what's happening. Make sure that everything that's built up to this point is working together. The next lab, I believe, is an Oracle lab. Okay, so you can try and solve this one. It's going to be similar to the one that we just did, only you can use the SQL cheat sheet. We'll go ahead and walk through it again just so we can have one more practice before we get into the blind SQL injections, because these are going to use everything we just learned in this lesson plus quite a bit more. We're going to be looking at new aspects within burp and exactly how to use the intruder tool within the burp program. So I think it's very important at this point, if I can stress it enough, we're going to have quite a bit of practice going into the blind SQL injection, but it's a lot more difficult than what we just went through if you've never done this before. So go through this again if you have to. Make sure you understand what's happening and what's going on. I want you to try and solve this lab completely on your own. I'm going to give you 2 clues before you start, but other than that, you have already learned everything necessary for solving this challenge. We'll go ahead and open up the lab, and if you remember, when we do go through an Oracle database, you have to use from dual when you're trying to pull down the number of columns within the table. And so since we're looking for we're going to have to log in as the administrator, that should give you a clue to at least how many columns are going to be within the table. And so the other clue I wanted to give you is if you go ahead and open up the SQL injection cheat sheet, when you pull this open, you are going to be using from all tables instead of information schema. So in the last lesson, we used information schema as our default. Well, that's not what we're going to be using this time. This time we're going to use all tables. Everything should be the same as it was last time. The only difference is we're going to be using all tables instead of information schema. And so you can go ahead with that information and try and solve this lab. And if you have gotten stuck, we're going to go ahead and walk through this together now. So the first thing is turn your interceptor on. We're going to go through the normal procedures here. We're going to send it to repeater, turn the intercept off, and make sure that we have our error appear, which we do. So this is telling us we have a SQL injection. We are going to pull down the number of columns. I know there's at least 2 because we were told that we have to log in as the administrator, which means there's at least a username and passwords column. So we have at least 2 of those. And then we'll go ahead and send this, and it comes back. So there are 2 columns. Both of these are going to have to retrieve a string in order for us to pull down a username and password. So I'll go ahead and check it anyway, but I know it's going to come through, and it does. Now this is where we are going to start practicing what we learned in the previous video. So if you remember, the first thing we have to do is find the table name. So we can go ahead and type in our table name, and this is from. Last time we used information schema, but if you remember, this time we're going to use all tables, and there we go. So this should give us all tables. If you remember, last time there was a bunch of them, but we are looking for the users. I'm guessing this is the one that we need. History. We're going to go ahead and pull down the information. Well, this is, we'll grab a couple of them just in case, but I think that's going to be the right one. So we'll keep this one. This is the one we're going to roll with. Now what we'll do is we'll have to come back up here, if you remember, and change. Now that we have the table name, we're going to go ahead and insert this and see if we can find the column name. So we'll change this to column, and we'll leave our null, and it is from. And this time we're going to input in our table into our injection. So we have from all of our tables, and we're looking for, at this point, the columns where it is equal, the table is equal to the table name that we just pulled down. So we have where, and then we'll type in our table name, and then equals our table name. And we'll go ahead, look this over, and then we'll send it. And it came through. Now we have to hope that we have our columns. So we have a password column pulled down, and we have the username. Okay, now we have to change our injection one more time. So this time we'll be getting rid of our null value, and we're going to be putting in first our username, and then we're also looking for the passwords, which will come from our second column. and this is going to come from our table name, which I actually think we delete this. We'll delete that, and we'll delete this. And we have an error, comma, and we have pulled it down. So this should have our usernames and our passwords in it, just like the last one that we walked through. Here's the administrator and the password. And so if you remember, we have to log in to actually receive the solved lab up here. So we'll go ahead, paste that, and we'll copy and paste this and send it. And we have solved the challenge, and we are ready to start the blind SQL injection. We are going to go ahead and open up this lab. While it's loading, I thought I would just tell you this is going to be, the next couple of labs are going to be a little more difficult, and I think that you should practice them just to get this ingrained into your mind, what exactly is happening, because we're going to be adding quite a few new steps, but they actually let us skip what we have been practicing, because in the instructions they give us that we are going to be working with a table called users and two columns, usernames, or the username and passwords. So we don't have to go find the table and we don't have to find the columns, but we do have to still log in as the administrator to complete this lab. So you can go ahead and open up this lab, start this lab exactly how we normally would by opening up one of these tabs, forwarding it, and then sending our request to the repeater, because what you're looking for is a request with this tracking ID. You need that tracking ID because that's where the SQL injection is going to be. So we'll send this, and you can send it a few times. And what I'm looking for is this content length. I want to make sure that it does not change. And sometimes you will send this on some web applications and it will change every time, no matter what you do, the exact same GET request. But for us, in our case, it stays the same, which makes this lab much easier to solve. And when you have this tracking ID, you can also check it as well for the SQL injection. And so you send it and you can see the content length has changed. So it's 4906, and you send it and now it has changed. This tells us there is a possibility of a SQL injection. So what we're looking for is what has actually changed in our response. Here, what I like to do when I come across a different response is to copy this and take it to a text editor. I think it's easier to read through and to look at, and I also can search, which we are going to do right here. So when it comes back without any modifications, we have the, let's send this again, we have the welcome back is on the page. When we put in our single quote to try and provoke an error, the welcome back is gone. So you can see we have 0 matches right here. And so with our 0 matches, we want to send a true statement to make sure that we can really add on to this query. So we go or 1 equals 1 and then comment this out. That comes back as true. So we know that we can give some kind of request and see what comes back true, what is actually true and is on the database will come back with this welcome back, which is what we're going to have to pay attention to. And so because we've already been told what the table name is and the column names, we can go ahead and start to look for information from this table. So we'll type in our usual union select, and this is where it changes, because we're going to now add a character into our query. So we're going union select from, and then we're going to go to our users table where the username, username is equal to, and then remember we were told we need to log in as administrator, so the username we're looking for, and we are going to send this and see if it comes back as true, and it does. So we have this, and now what we can do is we can actually add on to it, and we can look for the length of the password. And so you can come in here and you can look to see how long the password is, and you can pull down the length of the password, and you can come in here and you can go plus and plus length, and then we add in the password, and then you would add is it greater than, and then you can start right here and you can start sending to see is it greater than 1, is it greater than 2, is it greater than 3, and you can send this to the burp repeater and just continue seeing is it greater than and looking through this. What I am going to do is I'm actually going to skip this process for the sake of time, because we're going to have to go into a burp intruder and start looking for the actual password. And so what we're going to do is we're going to send this query over to the intruder and see what we can pull back. So I'm going to go ahead and take this query here, and what we're going to do is we're going to take this and we're going to add into it the characters that we're looking for. And so you would add in that you're looking for the first character and only one character inside the query, and then you're going to start with the character A. Now this, at this point, I'm sure this is the first time you've ever seen anything like this. It looks very strange, and it is going to feel really strange doing things like this. It's new and it's kind of confusing, so we'll send this not to repeater, to intruder. And so we have this new string that we're sending. So we have our normal union select, and then we have a string from users where the username equals administrator. So we're looking on the table name users under the column username for the administrator's password, and we are looking for the actual password at this point. And this, actually, I just noticed we're not looking for the length of the password, we're going to be looking for the substring. So we'll come over to intruder, we'll look at our positions because we've already sent this over here. We'll clear where it wants us to start querying, and we are looking for the substring in the password. And so we will go ahead and set this up. What we do at this point is, as we set up our payload, you will add the whatever those symbols are to tell it this is where we want to shoot through, or we're going to use the cluster bomb. So this is where we're going to be going through and sorting to make sure we have the right characters. And then we'll add right here, because if you remember, this selects the first character, and then it's going to go through the first character for all of the characters that we give it. But then we want it to go through the second character as well, and then the third and the fourth and the fifth, until we reach the end and we have the password. I don't have the professional version of burp on this system, and so this is actually going to go really slow, and once it starts I'm going to go ahead and pause the video so you don't have to wait for it to pull down the password, because it will actually take a while without the professional version of burp. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to set up our payloads. And so if you remember, payload 1 is going to go to this position, and payload 2 is going to go to this position. So the first payload, we're going through numbers. So we will find numbers, and we're going to go from 1, and this is when I guess it would have been helpful. I'm just going to go really far. This is when it would have been helpful to see how many characters were in the password, so you would have known how far you needed to go. and then we're going to go by a step of 1. So it's going to go up 1 character once it goes through all 30 characters, and then position 2, we are going to be going through the alphabet. See if it has the alphabets in here for us. I believe it does. Manually add these in, it would be a lot easier to go through these without having to do this, but I will edit this out. Alright, I believe we have all of the characters added in. What we can do is we can go ahead and start the attack, and we can say okay. And now it is going to go through and start working through all of those characters. So position 1 and A, is position 2 and A, is position 3 and A, and it's going to go through and check every character for each position until one returns true. Okay, I have gone ahead and cut the video in the middle of where we were after starting the attack, and you can see that it's been running and we've pulled down some of the characters that we've needed. One of the things that might be helpful, if you copied exactly what I had typed in into the payload or into the query right here, I actually had a error, and I had to go through and change that and fix it. And then that ran for a little while, and then also my computer fell asleep while running this, and it closed out my query, and so I had to restart it. And so this has been running for what feels like forever. And so I'm going to go ahead and we're going to stop it here, and I'm going to show you a little more manual way. And it's also a lot faster because if you can see, it's sending one query each time to the server, and it's very slow, anywhere from 10 to 15 seconds. And it's because we've sent so many. And this is one of the things Burp does in order to get you to buy Burp Professional, so that it'll send them really fast. So they've throttled this down, but I'm going to show you a way that you can kind of get around this and send your queries a lot faster. Before we start that, I kind of wanted to show you our positions just in case it wasn't clear. Remember, in our query, we are selecting from the users, the table users, where the username is just the column, and we're looking for the name of administrator inside the password column. And so we're sending, this is the first character in the query, so this would be position number 1, and then it'll change and it'll go position number 2, and then position number 3, and it will send A all the way through however many we set those positions, 1 2 3 4 5 6, to see if an A comes back as true in any of those cases. And if it comes back true, we'll see something like this. You can see the length has changed and the welcome back is present in the response. And then once it goes to all of position 1 for all of the alphabet, it will go to B, and then it will start over and it'll continue and it'll go through like that. This is a very automated way. We don't have to really do anything. We just set it up and let it run. But if you don't have Burp Professional, this can take a very long time. And one thing before we go ahead and I show you how to organize this to find the password is that in order to get this welcome back to show up, what you do is you can check in your response and you can have your welcome down here. And if you can see these, it matches. The welcome has come back, which means it's true, and we have a match. For these down here, it is not true and there is no match. And so we can sort out the true characters that exist and in which position they exist. So there's a G in position 2. There's a G in position 15, we have a K in position 8, and so on. And so we can know this is where there's characters and this is how it's true. But in order to get this welcome up here, you have to go into your options. You will come down, so it'll start you up here. You'll scroll down to grep match. You will clear what's in here and you will add welcome. You'll get a little pop-up. You'll just click OK. And then it will bring you back to your results and it will look like this. And what you do is you just click this and you click it again until we have the arrow facing down, and it will have all of the characters there for you as it runs. Now, the way I like to sort out the password is to have a text file open, which is right here. We have our text file. We'll delete this, and we'll delete this, and we'll paste this in. So what we have here, we'll also delete these because these are just our query numbers on how many GET requests were sent to the server. And I think the less numbers we have, the easier this will be to understand. So this, if you remember, let's open this back up and have our text file. This is the position from payload number 1, and this is the character that has come back in payload number 2. So what you would do, so let's say this is what we've brought back, and the query is finished, even though we know it's still running and it's going to take 5 more hours for it to finish running. So what we'd do is we'd have our password equals, and you'd come here and you'd go, okay, position number 1 is I, and then we'd look for 2. 2 is O. Position number 3 is a K, and then position number 4 is an I, and position number 5 L, and position 6 is a G, and then you'd go along and you would just continue doing this all the way through. So we go 6, and then we go 7, and then 8 is a C, 9 is N, and by the time you've gone through all of this, this is your password. And so we were told that the username is administrator and the password is what we're pulling down right here. And we'd come over here, we'd go to our lab, and this is where we would come in, we'd click login, you would use administrator, and then this password that we have just pulled down. So if you want to let your intruder run forever, because it is really slow, especially once you get past about position, after you get past request number 30 to 35, it really slows down. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Okay, we are going to look at the blind SQL injection with time delays. So what you'll do is, if you find what you believe to be a SQL injection, you will inject a time delay, and they're pretty simple. But I also want to look at the cheat sheet because they're going to be different, and we're only going to be looking at this one right here. The blind SQL injection with time delays is really simple to the one with conditional responses, which we just looked at. The only difference is you would be running a case then statement, which if you're a programmer, it's like if then, and you're going to be saying if this is true, then sleep, and rather than if this is true. So with the cheat sheet, these are all going to be different. So you'll have to run this to get your program to sleep. For your delay with Microsoft, it's going to be like your syntax is going to look like this. For PostgreSQL is going to look like this, and MySQL is going to look like this. And so each one is going to be a little different, and you might have to just try each one and see what comes back for you. Okay, so this is, we're going to have to solve the lab, we need it to sleep for 10 seconds, which is kind of a long wait, but 10 seconds feels like forever when you're waiting for a response to a GET request. So we will go ahead and turn the interceptor on. Open this up. I think I clicked in the wrong spot. Oh, there's a tracking ID. We have one right there. And this will look, let's see if it says it's blind, so it's not going to have anything for us. I'm actually going to go ahead and go to an item so that I know I'm in the right spot and you guys don't have to watch me fumble around like you are right now. So we'll go ahead, send that to repeater, and the SQL injection that we're looking for with the time delay is the PostgreSQL right here. So what we'll do is we'll use this syntax right here, the PG sleep 10, and we're going to have to concatenate it to our query. So it's just 2 types, which is just above your enter key or your return key if you're on a Mac, and then you just type in the syntax exactly like you just saw, and then we don't forget to comment out the rest. And that should take 10 seconds for our response to come back, and once that response comes back, we should have a solved up here.
And so the time delays are really simple. They're really easy to run, and this is how you do it. I'm not sure why that didn't come back as solved. Maybe we have to go ahead and forward this. There it is. There's the solved. So they're really simple to run. They're really easy proof of concept. You can change this to 5 seconds if you're impatient like I am, and wait just 5 seconds instead of 10, but you have to do 10 here to solve the lab.